I'm Ben Lackey. I'm with Couchbase.
Gil Isaacs, I'm with Microsoft.
And today we're going to talk about deploying Couchbase on Azure. Step through how to do that, and then towards the end, Gil's prepared a demo on how to run an application from your laptop actually connecting up to Couchbase running in Azure.
All right, let's dive in. So this is our agenda. We'll just talk about the whys and whats of Azure, and we'll go into Couchbase on Azure, and then run through a demo. And I'm kind of going a little fast because there's a lot of stuff to cover, but please stop us if you have any questions. So just by the numbers, and not sure, who's here has used Azure? Anybody? Hands on? Okay. Oh, cool. All right. Awesome. So just a fun number slide. The amount of momentum and the amount of work that's going on with Azure and the way it's being adopted and taken up by the market has been pretty exciting. I've been with Microsoft about 5 years, which means I spent most of my career as a Microsoft watcher prior to that. And even we just can't keep up. It's pretty exciting what's going on. So it's just, and this slide also changes every time I see it. So why Azure? What is it about Azure that would enable your business? Hyperscale is obviously a big one. The global coverage, the fact that Azure is in almost every corner of the planet. This slide also is one that gets updated pretty frequently as far as how we're rolling out data centers and how we're just building capacity everywhere. And that is not only that we've got a physical presence of compute power, but that we understand what it takes to do business in those regions. We also understand commercially, we have relationships. So the relationship and the Microsoft understanding of your business in all those corners of the globe is also extremely powerful and a major enabler. And the other part is the other pieces of our cloud. So Microsoft, before people were calling what we're doing on the internet now, cloud, Microsoft was doing things like that. You go all the way back to Hotmail, right? You look at Xbox Live, you look at Office 365 and Dynamics. Those are all things that Microsoft has been doing. That's our practice. That's something that we know as a core competency of our business. But these other services and other pieces that you can plug in are also major enablers to your business within Azure. The other thing that I like to point out here, and we'll talk about this a little more, is all of this is accessible from the pane of glass, right? Single pane of glass, log into my browser, I can start up servers in Japan, I can start up servers in South America. That's extremely powerful, right? I don't have to build a data center there if I want to do business there. I can just start up servers, right? And the other thing is, not only from the browser, but I can build an application because everything within Azure is done via an API. And so you can build applications that create and manage applications. And so that overall as an enabler, and certainly with other public cloud providers, they have a similar capability. That's really one of the things that has enabled cloud to be such a driver in the marketplace. The other thing is just from a trust standpoint, and I actually put the link in here of, can't see it at the bottom, but folks will get these slides, I guess, right, after the conference. But if you just search for the Azure Trust Center, another aspect of what Microsoft brings to the market is that we know all of these audit standards, and we're working with all of the standards bodies to push things forward and to really help the auditors grapple with doing business in the cloud. So again, another picture that is always growing every time I see it. So what is Azure? We like to call this the eye chart. This is a point-in-time view of services that are available within Azure. If you look at this kind of like the bottom up, right, everything depends on the data center. It all lives in the data center. You have physical infrastructure. And then on top of the physical infrastructure, you're starting to virtualize. So the core bottom layer is compute, storage, and networking. Virtual machines, this type of stuff, if you're working on-premise, you're doing, let's say, with Hyper-V or other virtualization solutions that might be out there. That's really what is enabling the cloud as well, that kind of virtualizations. Now, we highlighted a few services here because when we talk about Couchbase on Azure, you want to think about those services because it is a little overwhelming, and I said this before, and I might say it a couple other times, it is hard to keep up. This picture keeps growing, right? But a really easy entry point for most people is this bottom VM tier, storage tier, networking tier. So when you deploy Couchbase into Azure, you're running on VMs, you need storage, you need connectivity. That's your fundamental base tier. And then you're going to use the portal to access Couchbase, and you can launch it from the marketplace. And you'll see these in a couple minutes. So let's go to the next piece. So now we'll just look a little bit of architecture, and maybe, Ben,
Sure.
you want to step in a little?
Yeah, thanks, Gil. So one of the really exciting things about Couchbase to me is that we're really enabling these web, mobile, and IoT applications. You can run Couchbase Lite out on your iPhone, synchronizing back to a database running in some data center. And that's such a natural thing to do in the cloud. You might be using your mobile phone on any country on Earth, and Azure has a data center nearby that thing can potentially synchronize with and communicate with. It fits very well with Couchbase's ability to do cross-data center replication, our XDCR capability as well. So Azure has this wide presence, the 30-some-odd regions. We provide the ability to deploy Couchbase into any of those regions, a cluster running, say, in this case, in America, in Europe, and in Asia, all those clusters synchronizing with devices out at the edge, all connecting into them and talking. So we see this really natural fit in the partnership working with Microsoft with their broad reach and how we both fit into geographical distribution and these disparate devices connecting up. So, oh yeah, did you have a comment, Gil?
No, I wasn't sure if you...
Yeah, well, next. So drilling into that a bit, in the last picture I showed 3 clusters on 3 different continents. In this picture, we see a bit of how that's actually deployed into Azure. And this is something you could either do manually, click create a virtual network, click create a network security group, or you can use some artifacts we provide, something called an ARM template, an Azure Resource Manager template, that automates the deployment of all this stuff. And Gil's going to show you how to deploy that through a GUI, as well as how to deploy that through a command line. At this point, I want to call out one of the great things about working with Microsoft on all this has been partnering to build this stuff. So I'm based in the Seattle area. I spend a lot of time up in Redmond working with the Microsoft engineers and Gil's team on putting all this stuff together. So our deployments at the top level in each region, we have a virtual network. That virtual network has a network security group attached to it. The NSG is basically a bunch of firewall rules. So we block off all the ports that Couchbase isn't using. We open up ports for the administrator, ports for the cross data center rep, and a couple other things. Then kind of the next unit we have within that is something called an availability set. And if you guys are familiar with other clouds, they have a concept of availability zones. Azure treats things a little bit differently. Each region, you can define an availability set within, and that can have up to 3 fault domains. Those fault domains map roughly to that concept of availability zone. In our templates, we're currently setting the number of fault domains to 2. So the idea is to have 1 primary and 1 backup for each copy of data. And then we're setting something called the upgrade domains to 20. An upgrade domain's kind of for a planned outage, a fault domain's for an unplanned outage. Yeah, so within that, within each fault domain, you can have multiple virtual machines. We're using the S-series virtual machines within Azure. So you have machines like a D-series, and a D-series can come in a standard version or a DS, which takes part of the drive and uses it for premium storage. So we're recommending machines like FS, DS, and GS machines. And the templates are all set up to deploy those. Going one level further down, each of those VMs is automatically deployed with a disk attached to it. For the disks, we're using Azure's premium storage. So that's network attached SSD storage. It comes in 3 sizes, a 128, a 512, and a 1 terabyte drive. So a lot of the value we add here with these ARM templates is bundling up all that complexity and automating it for you and making it really easy to deploy. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Gil and let him show you just how easy to deploy that is.
Thanks, Ben. So let's jump in to the Azure portal and get a quick tour of what things look like when you're working in the portal. So just first of all, if I want to create something in the portal, I just come over here and it'll give me this list. So that eye chart corresponds to all these different options that are over here. So for instance, let's say I wanted an event hub, which is a high-speed IoT scale service bus. I can easily find it here, and I can create one. If I wanted to create a virtual machine, I can create a virtual machine from here, and it'll take me to a screen where I'll enter all my login information, I'll choose the size of the machine, and we'll be off to the races. Now, if I want to use a package solution like Couchbase, I just come up to the top, I hit New, and let's search for Couchbase. And we'll see I have 3 options here in the marketplace. I'm going to select the first one, and I'll come here to click Create. Now, we kind of talked back and forth a little bit about Resource Manager, the API. Let me kind of bring that together a little bit. Okay, so the Resource Manager is actually, it's a capability within Azure, and it's the name of the API. And what that enables is that you can create templated, JSON-based connections of infrastructure so that you can basically send those to the Resource Manager and create these related stacks en masse, right? So you can just replicate that. It's also the API. So when you're making REST calls, and it's all REST-based, this portal, when I'm doing stuff, it's talking REST into Azure, the Azure API, and it's talking to the Resource Manager. If I'm writing a Java program, a C# program, a Node.js, Python, we have SDKs, and the SDKs basically take your code, give you easy ways to write Azure calls, and then turns those into REST calls that go against the Resource Manager, right? So if I come in here and I, oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Gil. Real quick, I just wanted to step back and show there a couple different offers in here. We'd selected an offer that includes Silver support. In addition, there's a bring your own license offer and an offer for the Couchbase Sync Gateway. So we can deploy any of these, but to get server, either one of these. So sorry to interrupt,
Cool.
Gil.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you. And actually, is there anybody in here who works for an ISV, building software that you sell on the cloud? Okay, so if you ever do that kind of work, that's what my team does. We work with Ben and other ISVs, and this marketplace is really a ballooning set of offers of package solutions, right? So package solutions on the cloud. My team, I work with a global team that we partner with ISVs to build these. So as Ben was showing here, you have a couple different options of how you might want to license Couchbase on the cloud. So we'll go to the BYOL, right? Thank you. And I'll just put in a login, I'll put in a password, and we'll confirm the password. I have a couple of subscriptions. I'm just going to select my main one. Now here's where I select the resource group. The resource group can be anything. It does have to be globally unique, but I'll put it in a name. I'll say, let's say GI Couch Connect. It's the 23rd. And here, as I mentioned, kind of anywhere in the globe. I mean, look at all of these different options, Korea and Brazil, South, et cetera. We'll just select East US 2. Click OK. I can specify how many nodes I want. I'll just keep it to 3. I don't want to clobber my quota. And I can say how big I want each one of those nodes to be. So this is, Couchbase's recommended sizing. But there are really, again, an ever-growing population of machine types that you can select, depending on the type of horsepower you want. So we'll stick with this one. Let's close that. And then it's going to say, hey, you sure? It's going to kind of validate things. And this is basically, it's generating a template, and there may have been selections that need to be validated against some edit rules that any given solution provider wants. We say OK, and then it's just going to confirm, do you want to essentially buy this solution? And now we'll purchase it. So what this did is it put together a resource template based on my selections, and it's now calling the resource manager and saying, stand this up, okay? Well, what does this look like? I actually have one, so it's telling me, hey, I'm deploying, but I actually have one that I created. So this is, when the deployment has been created, you will now see all of your infrastructure that's related to your cluster organized by the resource group that you named it. So yesterday I created one. You can see I have a bunch of NICs. I have public IPs. I think I skipped, well, there's the availability set that Ben was talking about, the network security group. Here are the premium storage disks, the VMs, and a VNet. And if I wanted to track, we could go back to the other deployment, see the deployment process, but this is a deployment that's finished. So there were 3 different deployments that it's giving me status on. The first one actually gives me, as an output from the template run, it gives me the URL for the Couchbase administrator. So I can just copy that, come over here, and we'll log in. And for anybody who is a Couchbase user, this will probably look very familiar. So you could see that here's my couch. This is running in Azure, and I've actually enabled the travel sample. Okay? So just a little bit about what the resource manager stuff, just so you can see some of the JSON here. So this is actually a simple template. Actually, I got ahead of myself by one step. Let me just show you where you can get to this. I'm showing it to you on my laptop, but we actually have a quick start library of templates. So if I just wanted to put together like a Ubuntu stack that was built with some stuff, I can go to this quick start library, search, and here's a whole bunch of different Ubuntu stacks. I think I saw that Kafka was here, right? You can do a Kafka cluster on Ubuntu packaged, right? The Couchbase one is also here. Let's just take a quick look at that. So this is another way that I can access the Couchbase offer, is I can just go to the Quick Start templates, and there's actually a Deploy to Azure button here. So if I click on Deploy to Azure, that same panel where I entered all those user enterable fields, it basically launches the portal with the Couchbase offer already there. And then the actual project, you can access it on GitHub. I think this is ours, but then we really, what's happening is we actually have a bit of a publishing process. So this is the Azure Quick Start library, but I think Ben even said in here, please go over to this other, I put the link in the presentation. There is another library where there's more recent updates to the Couchbase templates, right? So when I go over here and I'm showing you the ARM template, this is actually, I think this is actually the latest pull from Ben's GitHub repository, and you can see, here are the resources. I have like a VM size and a username, and then I have parameters that I'm going to specify, and then I can just come to a command line and launch that from a command line. And I'm not going to run it right now, but just to show you, I just actually did one before. You can see that, ooh, that's really small. Can we increase that font? Let's make that font a little bigger. All right. So this is the Azure command line. So I'm going through a lot of UIs here. Let me just summarize this quickly. We looked at the portal. We looked at the marketplace as launching from the portal. We looked at going directly to the quick start template as a way, and you can deploy to Azure. And now this is the Azure command line. So I'm actually, and I don't know, there are some Windows PCs in here. This is a Bash command line for Windows. It's the latest version of Windows 10 that you can do, and it's very Bash-like. It has almost all the capabilities that you would have in a Ubuntu Bash command line. And so there's an Azure cross-platform command line that if you have a Mac, you can install. If you're running on Linux, you can install, or on Windows. And I'm running that in here, and I basically am selecting that template. This is a group deployment create, and I'm telling it, use this ARM template that's actually out in the GitHub repository, and there's the parameters, and put it into a resource group. All right? So right from the command line, you can do that. So what I actually have is there is a cool Hello World app that is on, if anybody's done like the Getting Started on Couchbase. It's a Node.js based app, and I'll just start that running. And we will just go over here, and there's a little piece of fancy JavaScript. And if I just, this is the travel sample. Has anybody played with the travel sample in Couchbase? The travel sample bucket. So if I just query it, it's just going to fire this query off. And so this is essentially taking that query and shipping it across the cloud, if it comes back, to, I think there's something, this machine tends to lose its connectivity. All right, love the demo gods. Essentially, we're taking this query that's in here, and we're executing it. So yeah, there's a little bit of, we're in a hotel, there's a little bit of connectivity when we actually go at the code level, that, we were actually kind of banging our heads at this during lunch. I thought we got past it. But there's clearly some interesting connectivity things going on here. You can see I did actually run this previously, and this is actually return JSON from the Couchbase database. Not sure why it's not. All right, so I think that was, we have some links in the deck as well to get folks started. But that was really kind of the quick tour there. Yeah, and this is with the new,
Okay.
so, Murphy strikes again. Well, just for grins, let's just try another one. United Kingdom. Yeah, not sure. Something with our connectivity between my box on in the hotel. Let's try again. All right. So,
Well, yeah, so as far as next steps.
Yes.
Maybe we talk through this a bit. Oh,
Whoa.
okay, where did the slides go? Okay. All right. So a couple things you can do. Microsoft offers a free trial with several $100s of credit to get started on Azure to new users. That trial is somewhat limited. It only lets you deploy 4 cores. So if you are trying to use it to deploy, you might want to upgrade it to a pay-as-you-go account, or if your organization has an enterprise agreement, use that. Couchbase, being a distributed database, tends to be a lot more interesting if you run a lot of nodes. Couchbase is available in the Azure Marketplace, what Gil just showed you clicking through to deploy. Those ARM templates are also available up at Couchbase Partners on GitHub. That includes some instructions on how to use them, as well as like a simple deploy.shell script and a PowerShell script that wrap up all the commands you need and just take a couple parameters. So pretty straightforward to use. Gil also mentioned all the quick starts available to get you started and going with other technologies. And part of the power of deploying this stuff in the cloud isn't just using Couchbase in isolation. It's linking all these ARM templates together to, say, use Couchbase with Confluent, with Mesosphere, and build a broader solution that's really scalable and easy to use.
I mean, it's interesting that we followed Mesos, because last week I was on site with a partner who was running Mesos on Azure, and Couchbase was definitely one of the solutions in there. So just exactly what he was showing of deploying Couchbase from Mesos, I mean, that's running on Azure, right? So, you know, the whole container story is pretty big with Microsoft as well on Azure. There's actually an Azure Container Service that makes it a little easier for you to do things like Mesos, Swarm, and Kubernetes. So, you know, just the whole openness of what Microsoft is doing, the sharing, is really pretty exciting at this point.
Yeah, and one other thing I'd sort of mention, dovetailing into that, is we're continuing to invest in integrations with Microsoft. We have plans to work with Azure Container Service. If you look closely in that GitHub repo, you'll see one branch that uses something called VM scale sets. So the current template is using a for loop to deploy just a whole bunch of virtual machines. We'd like to move to the VM scale sets once a couple more features become GA. So working on that, we're also working on a template generator that'll automatically do cross-region deployments. Right now, to do a cross-region deployment with these templates, you can deploy in one region, deploy in another, and then manually go and point one cluster at another, and you'll have your cross-region all set up. But we'd like that to be even more seamless. So that's kind of what we'd had. Yes, please, questions.
Right here.
Oh, yes.
What are your best practices on migrating from any current platform to Azure Couchbase? Do I just create replication from my current whatever I spin up on Azure, and that would not be possible?
Okay, so if I understood the questions, what are best practices from migrating Couchbase running on one platform to Couchbase running up on Azure?
Correct.
Oh.
Right now we're on VM with AWS and we're moving to Azure, so just trying to figure out both.
Okay. So you have an existing cluster running in AWS, and you're curious about potentially running it in Azure. Yeah. So there are really two approaches you could have. One approach would be you have the cluster running in AWS, you create another cluster running in Azure, and then you can set up cross-data center replication between those two, have all the data migrate over, and then decommission the old cluster once you're done.
Wouldn't that cause a security issue if we did from AWS to
So in that case, you would be streaming your data over the internet from one cloud to another cloud. You can encrypt that traffic. Another alternative option would be to do a point in time. So take a backup of the database, ship it all over to Azure, and then recover it from there.
So basically doing that would be
I mean, they're both perfectly viable solutions.
So
Yeah.
my other question is, again,
Okay, so the question is, how do you choose what version of Couchbase you're running when you're deploying in the template? And that's actually specified down in the template. And part of the neat thing about the
This guy?
templates is they're just templates. They're intended for you to fork and modify.
Right.
So if you wanted to change,
If I went to the marketplace, forget the template, if I went to the marketplace and chose Couchbase, I didn't see a version that I could select. It said enterprise software. There were three options of what version if I want to go from point 0, 461, whatever I want to choose, how can I choose that?
yeah. So in order to specify which version you would like to deploy, you can't use the marketplace. If you want to deploy through the marketplace, that always deploys the latest version. If you want to specify the version, my suggestion would be to take the template, fork the template, and then modify that to deploy the version you want to use.
And if I could just, I mean, that's
Yeah.
fairly common for our partner solutions, is that in the marketplace, they generally will have the latest version. There is a capability to have versioning, but I really think in this agile world, I mean, all of our partners are moving so quickly that this approach is pretty common for what we see. Yeah, they all have like a GitHub project where you can put a specific version. Is that good?
Any other?
Yeah.
Okay,
over here.
and happy to talk more later.
In terms of, for example, the templates, is there any templates, for example, for development environment? We want to play around with that instead of just the enterprise. And how is the licensing without working in Azure?
So in the marketplace, there are two different templates. One will deploy Couchbase Enterprise with silver support, and that has a meter attached to it. So it charges, the number is 8.9 cents per VM core hour. The other option is to deploy a bring your own license version. And that can be used for development and non-production use, though it does not come with support.
Since with Microsoft, I was wondering how are you positioning Cosmos DB vis-a-vis Couchbase? And there's,
Yeah.
you guys are saying out there.
Yeah. The simple answer is the cloud is big and there's room for a lot of people. On the ground, different sales and accounts and people in running projects will have different opinions. But we really are, I mean, there's people who are working with Couchbase. There's people who are working with other NoSQL solutions, right? There's people who are working with Docker and people who are working with Mesos. I mean, we have a huge footprint of horsepower. We want as much running on there as possible. So we have some services that we run, and we hope people will like them and use them and appreciate them for the features that work for them. But we also are, there literally are people incented to make Couchbase successful on Azure. And that, they might, in some other account, they work on Cosmos, but they're very focused on working with Couchbase and enabling Couchbase from an engineering standpoint to be a market-leading solution on Azure. So it's an interesting world. It's very much a co-opetition world, no question about it. But there's my favorite example, which has been in the press anyway, is Office on an iPad. I mean, if that isn't a cooperative situation, I don't know what is, right? We're doing the same thing on the cloud, right? So we're really, living it on the ground. Other questions? How much time do we have?
Also, 5 more.
Okay.
We're done.
All right.
Thank you
Excellent.
very much, Sean.
Well, thank you for your attention.